Financial Argument. Follow us on YouTube.
We're going to have a conversation today about your wealth, what to do with it, especially in this environment. We got the Fed doing their thing, the debt ceiling out of control. And you know what? Really, what do you do with an overvalued stock market, housing out of control? You need answers and you need options. And I brought on the line Philip Kennedy. He's the author of Financial Judo, which you actually can download for free at his website. He's an accredited financial counselor, a certified financial planner, and he does pro bono financial counseling for those who need it. So really, he's out there providing a free service because he really cares about the cause of liberty, freedom, and helping people. His website's philipkennedy.com. Philip, thanks for coming on the line with me today on this beautiful Saturday afternoon.
Hey, thanks, Kenneth. And just full disclosure to your audience, I'm only a CFP candidate because I didn't pass the exam back in 2014. I came really close, but I almost look at that as a badge of honor because when it comes to the CFP, it's really all about trying to navigate this regulatory environment, and I'm frankly sick of it. So I'm only a CFP candidate. I just want to make sure I say that in case anybody does some digging.
Okay, well, I did not see that when I looked at your bio, so I guess people do have to do a little more digging than I did. Again, thanks for coming on the line with me. Philip, we had a big rate hike, not a big rate hike this week. It was a small rate hike, but it was a big announcement. Many thought the Fed would never be raising rates, and here we are again with another rate hike. And to their credit, they did it. They managed to bump rates up to 0.75 of a point. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's obviously too little too late. It's really absurd that we're even talking about it here in 2017. I had put together a video several months back about really how we got here. Why are we here in this situation? You had Ben Bernanke back in 2011 telling Scott Pelley on 60 Minutes, and we've lowered rates down to zero, but our plan is to incrementally raise them, and that's exactly what we're going to do. And if you look at that footage, it's just cringing, because now here we are. If Scott Pelley had said, and do you think it's going to take 6 years for liftoff? Ben Bernanke would have scoffed and said, oh, no, of course not. That's an eternity. No way. We're going to incrementally raise them, when it's appropriate, and it'll be far sooner than that. So, it's like we're living in an environment where I never thought adults would lie so much when I was a kid. You looked up to adults when you were a child, and you have great guests on your show each week, and that's really, when you break it down, that's really what all of this is about. I'm an accredited financial counselor. My goal is to almost provide financial therapy to people, and that's what a show like Crush the Street is, because your audience is smart. They realize that we're being lied to each and every week by the mainstream business media. We're lied to when the FOMC has a press conference afterward, and you can see it in Janet Yellen's eyes. She looks like a deer in headlights. So really, I think that, to get back to your question, we're just working through this period of a fraudulent economy, one day at a time. The Fed attempting to raise interest rates really doesn't matter. They're not even up to the low end, the 1% that Alan Greenspan took us down to. They're really just trying to have some dry powder for the inevitable upcoming recession, which I think is a depression if we're not already in one. So these rate hikes are absolutely meaningless to me. I hardly pay attention to them other than to have a guest on my show to comment on them, because I think we're all just looking for answers, and we're tired of the lies, and that's why most of your audience is looking to the alternative media so that they can finally get the truth.
Well, markets seem to be dependent on these lies, and if we go back to the end of 2015 when the Fed made its first rate hike, the rate hike was such a shocker. And if you recall, the start of 2016, the markets had the worst start on record. And I wonder if it's their way of just kind of easing into it, just so we don't spook the markets, because that seems to be like 50 to, I don't know, almost the entire reason why markets move. It's perception, because obviously they don't run on fundamentals. Ultimately, something's going to give, and I do believe that. But it's that perception that they continue to massage and to really direct people in a certain direction, at least in their thinking. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I listen to GATA a lot, the Gold Antitrust Association. And Chris Powell said a long time ago, we no longer have markets, we only have interventions. And I think looking at the fundamentals any longer is not going to pay off. None of this makes any sense. I've listened to plenty of smart guys out there. There are plenty of billionaires who are trying to make bets based on the fundamentals, even George Soros, and they're getting slaughtered. Fortunately for them, they've got the money to lose. For the people that I like to talk to, low-income folks, middle-class folks at risk, military families who, dad is outside the country and they're trying to make ends meet, they don't have the money to lose. They can't be gambling in these markets. And frankly, I've been nervous about the Dow or the market in general since about the summer of 2014. Once it crossed 17,000, I started to get pretty nervous. And then, we had August 24th, 2015. And for no apparent reason, the market's open and the Dow immediately falls, I think, over 1,000 points. I think it was the greatest intraday drop ever or something. I'm sure you got smart people in your audience and they may be able to correct me. But is this a place to have your nest egg in? I mean, when you see the volatility and you see that it's only as a result of intervention by the plunge protection team, I don't feel comfortable having my wealth in an environment like that. I mean, the old adage is true: buy low and sell high, right? We all can understand that. No matter what our level of financial education is, we all get that you want to buy something low and sell it really high. The idea is not to be buying the Dow when it's at all-time highs, only to discover, hey, this was no different than the internet bubble. It's no different than the housing bubble. Here we are now. This is the greatest bubble of all. It's the government bubble. I want no part of it. I want to be putting my wealth into things that are cheap. And I'm sure we're going to get into that as we have our discussion here.
Philip, I totally agree with you. And if I can play devil's advocate for just a second here, many will say that the Dow Jones is a great place to put your money. They're constantly swapping out the bad companies for the good companies. And why bet against the PPT, right? If they're going to continue to push this up, why bet against that? Even if you bought the Dow Jones at the peak in 2008, you're up now. You're up from where that was. So what are your thoughts on that if someone were to tell you that?
So I like to view discussions like this as if I only have an elevator pitch, right? If I only have 2 minutes to convince someone that the market is not where they should be putting their money, I go to something simple. And what I like to use is the Dow Gold ratio. And if you look at that chart, I think what we're witnessing now is no different than the late 70s, right? The Dow Gold ratio started to fall, favoring gold, and then there was a dead cat bounce before Jimmy Carter was elected. And throughout the Carter administration, it started to precipitously drop until it reached all the way down to 1-to-1, right? And I think it was the early 1980s. So you were able to buy the whole market for 1 ounce of gold. And I feel like we'll probably see a day when it'll fall below 1-to-1, because look at how far it got out of whack as we approached the millennium. It was all the way up to like over 40 ounces, like 45 or 46 ounces of gold. Now we have had a dead cat bounce again. We got to 2011, gold fell precipitously, lost like 40% or more of its value, almost fell below $1,000, but didn't. And now I think really once the Fed started raising rates, the market realized that, all right, this gold can actually get traction in a ever increasing interest rate environment. And I think we're going to now start the march upward. We're going to start the march upward in real terms. And eventually we will reach a point where we hit a Dow Gold ratio of 1-to-1 or lower. And, the bottom line is the laws of economics apply to everyone. They apply to Zimbabwe, they apply to the Weimar Republic, they apply to Argentina, and they apply to the United States of America. And so we're going to see it all over again. There is no free lunch. We are going to see the stock market definitely fall in real terms. They may be able to push it all the way up to 40, 50,000, but I don't think it's going to matter because in real money, and that's gold and silver, it's going to be falling. And that's really what counts.
You know, many people call gold insurance, and I agree with that actually 100%. But would you say that it's got more upside potential nowadays at sub $1,300? And considering where it's headed than just insurance for a catastrophic event?
I do. And here's why. You know, we just hit the debt ceiling again, right? Well, I joked this morning on my Facebook page. I don't know if anybody has ever seen the movie Elf, but he walks by this coffee shop, and granted, you know, he's an elf, right? He's from the North Pole. Everything is brand new to him. And on this coffee shop, on this diner, they had a sign that says world's greatest cup of coffee or world's best cup of coffee. And he comes in and he's like, congratulations, you did it. World's best cup of coffee, right? And everyone's looking at him like he's a total buffoon. And I kind of look at our debt ceiling in the same way. You know, a ceiling implies that that's the upper limit, but we end up raising it every single time. So our debt ceiling is no different than an entrepreneur who hangs a sign on his door that says world's greatest cup of coffee. It's absolutely meaningless. It's raised every single time. The government is on the hook for an enormous amount of liabilities, not just the stated 20 trillion that we're approaching, but when you factor in all the unfunded liabilities, I think most experts agree it's got to be north of 100 trillion, and maybe some even say close to 200 trillion. So there's only one way to get out of this mess. Do we really believe that the government is just going to let everyone who's waiting for a Social Security check to not get it? Do we really believe they're not going to pay for Medicare and federal pensions for government employees? They're always going to take the easy decision. You know, in the short run, maybe once in a while they make the hard decision, but in the long run, you can be rest assured they're going to make the wrong decision almost every single time, and that is going to favor the world's oldest money every single time.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I'm literally watching Bitcoin right now. Totally a tangent. It just went below $1,000. It's having quite a drop.
Okay.
Any thoughts on? Do you follow digital currencies at all?
I do. I actually like digital currencies more than I like paper currencies. I'm somewhat ambivalent about whether they constitute money or not. And I know that as I say that, there are probably viewers and listeners who are cringing after I make that statement. I mean, I've even had Jeff Berwick on my show and Tim Del Mastro, who just came out with a movie called Magic Money, The Bitcoin Revolution. I really admire these guys. I like their stance on most things. My greatest concern, though, about the digital currencies is just how volatile they are. Right now, I see them as nothing more than a trade, and here's why. We don't know who the winner is going to be. Sure, Bitcoin has had a great, first market advantage. They have the greatest. Bitcoin has the best brand recognition. It's being used throughout Asia. You see that when you watch the documentary, which I think Amazon Prime members can watch for free. So if you got Amazon, I would definitely encourage everyone to do that, watch Magic Money. Because then you're really, we're here in the United States and we're so myopic. We only really think about how things are affecting us. But it's a much larger world out there. And digital currencies are really gaining traction in places like Venezuela, where people are having to use them just so they can have food shipped back so they can feed their families. So there is a place for digital currencies, but I just don't like how volatile they are. I've been posting about Ethereum all week. I think in the span of 124-hour period, it went up over 40%. And so I would encourage folks to definitely have some, because you never know how high these are going to get. But as I said earlier, buy low and sell high. If you see a chart almost reacting like an asymptote, heading straight to the sky, that's probably not where you want to be entering. You want to be buying low and buying when no one's really talking about them, and then maybe use that appreciation, that purchasing power later on when some of these digital currencies have really topped out. And I don't know when that is.
I totally agree with you on that. And for me, I can't tell somebody, hey, buy Bitcoin and use it for, use it in 6 months to redo your kitchen, because you really don't want to store your money in that, because you don't know what it's going to be in 6 months. But I've thrown money at it, and I'm holding on to it for speculative potential because of the adoption, the mass adoption that we're seeing. And just the smallest amount of money can send these digital currencies through the roof. I mean, there's predictions out there, call them crazy, but $50,000 Bitcoin, even up to $1 million. And when you consider how many out there, how many, the total amount of Bitcoins that there will ever be, if they get a good little jump in the amount of capital that flows into it, who knows what it can go to. And I definitely don't want to miss out on anything like that. And I think I'm pretty safe here at $1,000 a coin, especially over the long term. That would just be my thoughts on that right there.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And I would go further to say, if you're a Winklevoss and you're worth $10 million, $50 million, $100 million, why not bet, like, I don't know, $100 or $1 million on Bitcoin, right? If it's only, say, 1% of your net worth, if you have $100 million and, betting $1 million on Bitcoin is nothing to you, why not? I'm just concerned about the folks that I talk to who are making minimum wage, and they follow a lot of the same shows that you and I watch on the internet, and they're like, hey, you know what? The Treasury is going to be bankrupt any day now, and the dollar is going to go to nothing, and they're buying Bitcoin when it's at its all-time high. I'm concerned for folks like that. So I'm trying to cater to a different kind of audience. I would probably tell them, hey, you know what, maybe Ethereum might be a better choice because it's not it had a pullback recently. It's not as expensive. We could, again, even if you got a debate going, an Oxford-style debate with some of the digital currency experts out there, I don't think they would agree on everything. But I do agree with you, Kenneth. They're limited in supply. They have all the characteristics of money, and except maybe they're not tangible. But there's some debate on that now that we're in this new era, whether money needs to be tangible or not. But I think if you can afford at least one Bitcoin, buy it, and don't look back whether it goes up or down, because I think the upside potential is probably much greater in the long run.
Mm-hmm. In your book, you talk about strategic living, and basically living in a place that's affordable. We know that housing affordability are at the highest levels on record. And it's sad when you think about it, because people are maxed out working multiple jobs, multiple part-time jobs. Both husband and wives are now working. In your research, I'd like to get some of your thoughts on where should some of these people who are struggling and may want to raise a family and have a quality life, where are these some of these places you would suggest around the country?
I like Texas and New Hampshire, and I like them for I like them for many reasons, but the biggest reason is they're tax-free states, right? So these are states that have a mentality that you're not necessarily a milk cow as their citizen. And
I thought you were going to say California.
What's funny is I was following a Facebook post where someone was lauding all the upside of living in California, and I just took this image that's right out of my book that I borrowed from some organization. It'll come to me later, and it was like state migration from 2000 to 2010. Mm-hmm. And I think California was like number 1 and number 2 in terms of people leaving the state, whereas states like Texas and Florida were in the top 5. So there's a similarity there. People are leaving the high tax states and going to places where there's economic freedom. You get to keep what you earn. One of my favorite shows that my wife and I like to watch is a show called Fixer Upper on HGTV. Mm-hmm. And this show is really gaining a lot of popularity. It's a husband and wife, and they fix up old homes in Waco, Texas. And it just blows our minds because we're sitting here on our couches in Northern Virginia. I actually live in Ashburn. It's a town right outside of D.C. in Loudoun County, and I think it was ranked like, in the top 5 richest cities by income in America a few years ago. So, I constantly tell people here, this is not reality, right? We live in what was formerly the richest country in the world, outside the capital or in some of the richest counties. This is not normal. What's normal is places like Waco, where you can pick up a house for $100,000 and then maybe put $50,000 or $75,000 into it, and then you have almost a $200,000 home. That's normal, So that family, they can afford that home, if mom and dad are both working, and it's closer to 2 times, 3 times annual earnings, whereas everywhere else, L.A., New York, Miami, the major metro areas, Chicago, families are paying like 10 times annual earnings just to put a roof over their head. And this is not normal. We've just grown to accept it. We've all been sold a bill of goods by the National Association of Realtors and all of these marketing and advertising efforts. And we're paying through the nose, and we've never been less happy as a nation.
Yeah. Well, and something I would add to the California mess, the bubble, is you got the migration of people out of California who are largely producing. They want to protect their money, and they're taking it to other states such as Texas. But the problem is California is importing a lot of people who want to be on the system. It's this recipe that's just not going to end well. And so many people on the left, they point to California and they say, look how great it is. Oh, it's the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. We're doing great. And what I try to remind people is let them know that, hey, you know what? These leftist policies, as big government policies, is actually relatively new. It's not this big government mentality that made California great. In a lot of ways, it was the free market and capitalism and the great weather, strategic coastline that made it a great place to live. What they're doing now is creating a massive bubble in that state. And unfortunately, if something bad happens in California, I mean, it's going to definitely affect the rest of the country, and it could affect the rest of the world.
No doubt. I mean, look no further than one of the guys I respect most, Adam Carolla, the biggest podcaster in the world. And he's friends with a guy named Bryan Cranston, who gained probably most of his popularity through that television show that is escaping me right now. Maybe you can
Breaking Bad,
Kenneth. Breaking Bad. And Adam tells a story. He was dropping Bryan off at the airport because they're really good friends. And Adam says to Bryan, where are you going? He's like, oh, well, I'm heading off to Arizona. We're filming a show called Breaking Bad. And Bryan won't admit this, but Adam will. Why is it being filmed in Arizona? Why isn't it being filmed in California? Well, because there are huge tax benefits that come with taking your production out of the state of California. Mm-hmm. You look at a guy like Samuel L. Jackson, and he does his movies in Canada and Nevada. All these guys, when the rubber meets the road, they may portray themselves as bleeding heart liberals, but they understand economics just as well as the rest of us. And they take advantage of all the opportunities that are available to net more in profits. So I think, everyone understands what or how these things end. I have a special portion in my book in chapter 8. It's called Socialism versus Capitalism. I talk about Venezuela at length because I went to Venezuela in the 90s. I have a good friend who grew up there. And the greatest consequence of going down the road to serfdom is the brain drain. You lose your best people, and eventually you look around, and the only people that are still there are the ones who weren't smart enough to leave. And so California will end up just like Venezuela in the long run. And I'm sure, people hear that and say, oh, no, never. But that ultimately is what happens. Every time these policies are tried, they fail. So it'll be no different, unfortunately. Hopefully they can turn things around, though, because, the weather's great and there's lots of reasons to love the state of California. And you don't want to see it devolve into a place like Venezuela where now the bakeries have been seized by the government because bread is considered a staple. It only makes things worse and continues to devolve. So hopefully, we see a turnaround, but there's going to be a lot of pain that has to take place first.
Sure. Yeah, and people, especially major voices from the left, they don't point out that the biggest losers are the poor and the middle class. When a big company shuts down its factory or closes its business and moves it to the Midwest somewhere, let's say that in the middle of Los Angeles, they move out to some, Ohio or something like that. Well, the guy who owns the business still can go vacation in California for 3 weeks a year. It's the people that are working for him that lost their jobs in LA that got screwed. And it's so unfortunate that, again, we were talking about this when it comes to libertarian thought, true conservative thought. It's you have to really, really wrap your mind around these concepts and move away from this immediate gratification, this swiping of the credit card that gets you stuff now without thinking about the future. And I actually want to talk to you a little bit more about what you do personally, why you started what you did, and how you're helping people now with the services you provide.
Well, a guy I have a lot of respect for is Ron Paul, and I even had the chance to listen to him speak. I guess it was back in September at a Marriott hotel near the Dulles Airport outside of Washington, D.C. And he encouraged everyone, politics might not be the avenue for you, but I ask all of you to find a way to support the cause of liberty in your own small way. And so that's what my brother and I have decided to do. My brother John Kennedy and I, we have a podcast each week. We talk about current events and money topics related to things that might help low-income and at-risk middle-class families. And the idea is that we all need to be supporting the cause for liberty in a way that we see fit through our own unique talents and efforts. And, that's what you're doing, Kenneth. It doesn't necessarily have to be through politics or the political system. It could be just in, spreading information about, things like the drug war, the defense spending, you could find little ways to, make an income on the side that, like a guy like Tom Woods, his entire career is now spent in the cause of liberty, and he finds ways to do it, like his Liberty Classroom, his podcast. He's got the Contra Cruise. There's a guy who's really taken it to extremes and is able to make an income rather than spending his life as a history professor in some school that's probably ultimately going to fire him for his deeply held personal beliefs that don't resonate with today's millennials, right? So I think that's really the idea, is for all of us to find a way that we can contribute. And that might mean starting out for free, and that's why we do things pro bono. But I think that everyone should take Ron Paul's words to heart, and we'll be able to turn this thing around in the long run.
I actually had the pleasure to meet Ron Paul back in 2012, shake his hand and watch him speak at UCLA while he was doing his rally. And he was unbelievable crowd, lines wrapped around UCLA to watch him. And I remember the feeling I had with the young people and their crave for liberty and wanting to leave people alone, entrepreneurship. And I think people have that deep down inside of them. They want that. And Ron Paul was a leader in this. And he's inspired so many people. Even with him not winning the presidency, he's gone on to just be one of the most influential figures. Really, he'll go down in history as a forefather in the liberty movement. And I think so many people already see him as that. And he's an inspiration for me, and especially in this world we live in today of economic disparity and hope for the country. Ron Paul makes me a believer in a certain degree in the country because he's spreading some real hope not this hope for change that Obama gave us, but real hope. And I appreciate that from a guy like Ron Paul.
Good. Well, and I know it's resonating with a lot of people as your show continues to grow, and you've interviewed some of the brightest minds out there. So it's a real treat to be on your show here. And, I think that we all, if you hear this message and there's an idea you've had, but you've been afraid to do it. Yeah, I think the thing that I've discovered on my little podcast is, some of these people seem like giants, especially when you interview a billionaire, right? You're like, wow, why would a billionaire even want to talk to me? But you find out that that person had to start somewhere. And, no matter where you are in life, whether, you're up to your eyeballs in debt, you don't have any savings, it's just like weight loss. You got to start somewhere. So if you hear a message like this and you want to do something, just take it one step at a time, and persistence is the answer. Don't get discouraged. Like you and I were talking in the pre-interview, my show hasn't gone gangbusters on YouTube. That's not stopping us. We're still reaching people one heart at a time, and that's really what matters.
Sure. Well, hey man, you've been an inspiration for me, and I've really enjoyed talking with you today. If you would just have one bit of advice that you would give people before we say goodbye here, what would that be?
Gosh, I guess my first bit of advice would be self-promotion. Download my free copy of Financial Judo, because I spent a year writing that book, and it's all my financial wisdom, and it's not really written for someone who's trying to work on Wall Street. It's really, whether you're a homemaker or a mechanic or you name it, you have a lot of smart people in your audience. I'm sure they know someone in their family who's struggling financially. This book is for them, and that's why it's free. And it's chock full of all of my financial wisdom that I've accumulated since the financial crisis. I was getting my MBA during the financial crisis, and they said, I guess I'll boil it down to this, Kenneth. I was in a business school at George Washington University, and they said, you know what? It was Wall Street greed that caused this financial crisis. And it's only as a result of doing my own due diligence and digging beneath the surface and finding Austrian economics that I discovered, actually, no, it's the fault of the Federal Reserve and our spendthrift government. So that's my advice to everyone in your audience is don't listen to the mainstream business media. They've been wrong before. They'll be wrong again. They're going to act like it was, something different, like Wall Street greed or, Donald Trump's fault, or you name it. But the fact is that, as I said earlier, the laws of economics apply to us as much as it does any other nation, and there is no free lunch.